Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. Boris Tizengauzen here with you. Today is October 22nd and there's a lot of important news. In this episode, Putin attacks Ukraine again, almost immediately after a call with Donald Trump. A confession. Putin's aide admits on camera to abducting Ukrainian children. This is genocide in its purest form. And also strikes by the armed forces of Ukraine on several important targets in Russia. Missiles destroyed a strategic factory. Trump backs down in front of China, and how this time in the US, Putin was figured out much faster than before. And will there be Tomahawks and sanctions against Russia? All this and more in today's episode. If this is your first time on this channel, subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. So, almost immediately after the conversation between Putin and Trump, it became clear that this time the Russians were figured out much faster. That's why all sides came out with statements rather quickly. The Russians said that we didn't agree on anything, and it's impossible to cancel a meeting between Lavrov and Rubio if it was never scheduled. And of course, you misunderstood us. That's a classic Russian move. And in general, let's start up the old tune again about the root causes of this war. This was stated by the head of Russia's foreign ministry, Lavrov. Well, and almost always after such conversations with Trump, Putin launches massive strikes on Ukraine. He does this for three reasons. First, to show that no one will dictate terms to him from a position of strength. Second, to give his own population a bit of joy, since things on the front for the Russians, to put it mildly, are not going well. Well, and if Russians can be happy about anything, it's this: they'll be shown strikes on peaceful Ukrainian cities. And third, to once again try to break the will of the Ukrainian people and force them to end the war on his terms. These are the three main goals. Naturally, that's exactly what happened this time. Today, there was a massive attack on Ukraine. A huge number of drones and missiles were headed for Kyiv and the Kyiv region. In Kyiv, the air raid alert only ended at 9 in the morning. It had started during the night. Dnipro, Poltava, Zaporizhia, Odessa region, Chernihiv, Kaniv, and Kremenchuk were also attacked. So in general, the main target is the energy infrastructure facilities. In other words, Putin once again wants to leave Ukraine without electricity, without heat, to break their will. And with this massive shelling, Putin once again sent a big message to Donald Trump. Unfortunately, there are casualties after this attack, including children. In the Kyiv region, as a result of the shelling, a mother born in 1987, her 6-month-old daughter and her 12-year-old niece were killed. That is, they moved from Kyiv to the region, hoping that in a village it would be calmer, that the alarms wouldn't sound so often, and they wouldn't have to run to shelters as frequently. But unfortunately, even their room in a private house took a direct hit. My condolences to those who lost loved ones today, and to those who were injured, wishing a speedy recovery. And in Kyiv as well, there were strikes on several apartment buildings at once. And in the morning, a Russian drone strike, actually 3 drones, hit a kindergarten in Kharkiv. After a night of massive attacks, thank God, all the children were evacuated and are now in shelters. They were rescued from there. According to preliminary information, many are experiencing acute stress reactions. In general, I remember well, I don't know how anyone can look at these images and still give Putin more time, still talk about 1,000 people dying every day. Well, it's nothing, we'll give him more time. Well, let's not talk about sanctions for now. Let's not talk about Tomahawks either. How is it possible? I remember well Donald Trump's words about how he had a good conversation with Putin, and then at night Putin bombards Ukrainian cities again. Trump himself admitted that he had a good talk with Putin, and then Putin strikes Ukrainian cities again. So did they have a good talk this time too? So are we going to use some Trump cards again, to use Donald Trump's language? Maybe Tomahawks or maybe some Russian assets could already be transferred to Ukraine, which Ukraine could use to buy long-range weapons? Or are we just going to watch and observe from the sidelines a bit longer? So maybe the war will just end on its own by itself. Maybe there's a specific number of kindergartens, hospitals or schools that Putin has to hit with missiles or Shaheds. Otherwise, I can't see a single rational explanation for why he's being allowed to keep doing this. Why aren't his financial revenues from energy sales at least being reduced so he has less money to spend on the war? The thing is, you can't just cover your eyes with your hands and say, "That's it, I don't see evil, so it must not be there," or "the boogeyman has already left, that's it," right? That simply doesn't work. That just doesn't work at all when you're dealing with real, genuine evil, especially if you're the President of the United States. And if you wanted to, you could just squash that bald Kremlin moth with a slipper and stop all these deaths of innocent people. I understand that maybe I and others, with our uncomfortable questions, might be interfering with the construction of a new, beautiful, luxurious ballroom, but after all, someone once guaranteed Ukraine's security when they took away its nuclear weapons. And now I want to show you a video that might help you better understand what Putin's Russia is, what their goals are in this war, and just who Ukraine is actually fighting against. I wish the whole world could see this video. I think, before I show it, I want to ask, have you often seen high-ranking officials in interviews basically incriminate themselves for the International Criminal Court? And they do it entirely of their own free will. In this video, which you are about to see in full, the Commissioner for Children's Rights under the President of the Russian Federation, Maria Lvova-Belova, openly admits that she kidnapped a Ukrainian teenager who loved his country and culture, and in Moscow they had to change his mindset. Let's first watch the video without any commentary.
Наш такой общий семейный фон Филипп, который приехал из Мариуполя, потому что приехал в очень тяжелом состоянии, посттравматический синдром у него был после всех этих обстрелов, плюс особое отношение к России, которое
Особое
мы там...
отношение к России, это что значит?
Ну, это тот негатив, который взращивали в Мариуполе долгое время у детей, в школах. Это была прям программа, которой он был тоже так же подвержен, как и все остальные. Москва, там, Россия, вообще вот все меня раздражает, ничего этого не хочется. Все время там какие-то истерики, все время мы там разговаривали по ночам с ним,
Он не хотел
эвакуировали
жить в
детские
России,
дома.
получается.
Он не хотел жить в России, да. Он все время сидел на проукраинских сайтах, ну и читал там, в общем, всю пропаганду.
Будучи в Москве уже?
Конечно, будучи в моей семье, вот он, да, на
Вы не
диване,
знали
на
об этом
диване
или
сидит
знали?
и смотрит. Нет, ну я когда видела, конечно, я говорила, слушай, ну это как бы, давай, все-таки ты
Не
приехал
надо,
уже
да?
в Россию, нужно как-то менять отношения.
Риторика какая? То есть я не хочу жить в России, хочу
Я не
жить где?
хочу
На
жить в
Украине?
России, да, потому что, значит, вот я люблю Украину, он пел песни на украинском языке все время. Его постепенно началось изменение сознания в сторону того, что есть на самом деле.
Let me remind you, in the video, the Children's Rights Commissioner under Putin is speaking, and she says this with complete seriousness, that the boy arrived in a severe condition with post-traumatic syndrome from Mariupol. After those shellings? Why those shellings? Let's be specific. What kind of shellings were those? Who attacked Ukraine? Who leveled his native Mariupol to the ground? And the host asks her, so he didn't want to live in Russia, is that right? She says yes, he didn't want to. When we brought him to our family in Moscow, he would sit on the couch and look at Ukrainian websites. He said, I don't want to live in Russia because I love Ukraine. And that needed to be changed. She herself has said enough for The Hague, let me remind you. She already has an International Criminal Court warrant for illegal deportation, for kidnapping Ukrainian children. Just like Putin has been issued the same warrant. So this is pure Nazism what they're doing. Well, can you imagine that? So they took a child who sang Ukrainian songs, visited Ukrainian websites, said, I don't want to live in Russia, and started to break his mind. They took him into their family. Let me remind you, they are living there now. With that very same Orthodox oligarch Malofeev, this is Lvova-Belova, and they're with him. They live there, and this is the very same person who also financed illegal armed groups in Donbass. So it's basically a family business there. What Maria Lvova-Belova is doing and openly saying in this video is, by legal and historical standards, classic genocide. These are Nazi practices of forced assimilation. She can't not know this. She can't be unaware of the convention, the UN Convention on Genocide. Let me remind you, Article 2 of the convention explicitly states that genocide includes not only killing, but also the forcible transfer of children from one group to another group with the intent to destroy that group as such. So the abduction itself, and this re-education of children of another nationality, is already an act of genocide. It is precisely this article that covers what Putin is doing, and this Lvova-Belova as well. And she sits there calmly telling the camera how she stole a Ukrainian child and is breaking their mind. Just so you understand, according to various estimates, do you know how many Ukrainian children have been illegally deported? About 20,000. And the Russians, by the way, used to say, we never stole any Ukrainian children. Recently, Melania Trump said that they managed to return 8 Ukrainian children. That is, Russia gave back 8 children back home to Ukraine. And by doing so, they already admitted that these were stolen children. But no one would take children from Russian families and send them to Ukraine, right? So this is essentially the same Lebensborn, what Hitler and Himmler did, a program that lasted 10 years, from 1935 to 1945. That is, Hitler and Himmler created a network of homes where they selected racially valuable children from occupied countries. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, the USSR. Children were forcibly taken to the Reich, renamed, given new names, forbidden to speak their native language, and taught to hate their regions, their peoples, How is what Russia is doing now any different? The way they Germanized Polish children, as they called it, erasing Polish identity and raising them as Germans. Well, this is exactly the same thing. The Soviet Union, the same thing, genocide of entire nations. I, who was born in Crimea, know very well how, literally in just 3 days from history, how literally in 3 days Stalin deported from Crimea almost 200,000 Crimean Tatars. They were put into freight cars, into cattle cars, and sent off to the countries of Central Asia. And they only returned after many, many decades. Many died along the way, for weeks. Imagine, you're riding in a cattle car for a week somewhere with small children, pregnant women, the elderly. So it was the same thing. You know, I remember, well, by the way, the Baltic countries were deported in exactly the same way, to erase, to destroy national identity. This is exactly what Putin wants to do to Ukraine now. I remember it very well. How the Crimean Tatars began returning en masse to their homeland in Crimea. Back then, well, how old was I? It was the early 90s. I was about 10 or 12. I was riding in a car with my grandfather to Simferopol, and there was a field along the road, and there were piles, mountains of construction bricks. And I asked my grandfather what's going on. He said, these are the Crimean Tatars returning to their land. I asked, why is this happening? Do you know why? Because they couldn't wait for all the bureaucratic permissions for their land to be returned to them, for permission to build. They just dumped the bricks like that, wherever they could, as they returned to their land. That's how much they wanted it. They dumped the bricks and built small houses right there in the fields, without any utilities. Only later did they get everything connected. They wanted so much to return to their homeland and build there. I was shocked at the time. Then some law enforcement officers were sent to them there. They put up a tough resistance against them. So in short, they were returning to their land. That's how it was. The Crimean Tatars. Putin, by the way, is continuing Stalin's work. Now he is carrying out repressions against the Crimean Tatars in Crimea after the occupation. So basically, it's exactly the same thing all over again. Several representatives of the Crimean Tatar people studied with me at university. But they were very serious people. They were. They understood that if they had to return by force, then something was clearly wrong. The environment was still hostile at that time. That's true. But they were always very hospitable with their wonderful cuisine. In Crimea, well, I think those who have been there know. They had just started to live, and now they are the ones hit hardest by the repressions. Putin's FSB's repressions. Back then it was the NKVD, now it's the FSB. They had just started to live a normal life on their own land, and once again, Russia came like a reincarnation of the USSR with its repressions. And I want to remind Putin and Lvova-Belova that crimes against humanity have no statute of limitations. I wanted to show this video specifically to everyone, and it will also be released on our English language channel so that people can better understand who Ukraine is fighting against and what the real goals of Putin's Russia are in this war. Globally, the goal was to destroy and erase the identity of Ukrainians, to erase it completely, because they believe that Ukraine as a nation does not exist. Ukraine is a fictional country. He talks about this all the time. Remember how he starts with the Pechenegs, the Polovtsians, Rurik, and so on. And he leads to the conclusion that Ukraine is a made-up country. So here's a trick question. I always ask it to Putin's supporters. So, if Ukraine is a fictional country, then who has been handing out beatings to the Russian army here in Ukraine for the 4th year in a row? And who made it so that already more than 1,000 Russian occupiers have been killed or wounded in this war? Who are these made-up people, tell me? It's exactly about those who are handing them out. Let me remind you, friends, we have an important fundraiser for the legendary Azov, the Special Forces sniper unit of the Azov brigade. They are raising money for DJI Matrice 4 Tango reconnaissance drones. This is for the first Azov corps they are defending in the Pokrovsky direction, and they have addressed us directly to our channel and our viewers. I ask you, please watch it.
Слава Україні! Ми загін снайперів спеціального призначення бригади Азов. Звертаємося до Бориса Тизенгаузена та його спільноти за допомогою. Для виконання спеціальних задач наш загін потребує розвідувальних дронів. Будемо вдячні кожному і кожній. Слава нації!
Let's help our warriors, our defenders. And I have always said that all the hatred towards the attacks on Ukraine, towards the deaths of civilians and children, is best converted into support for our defenders. Believe me, a Special Forces sniper unit from the Azov brigade with reconnaissance drones will avenge everyone, and it will hurt the Russians very, very much. The link to donate is in the description of this video, and there's also a donation link in the comments. There are mono, private, and PayPal options for those who want to help from abroad. And a huge thank you to everyone around the world who is helping Ukraine. Your contribution to supporting Ukraine and to Ukraine's victory is very, very important. I always thank you both on my own behalf and on behalf of our fighters. By the way, friends, one of our previous fundraisers for the 3rd Assault Brigade, which we also successfully completed together, so our fighters from the 3rd Assault Brigade sent us a short video. Take a look at it.
Вітаю, друзі! Ми військовослужбовці батальйону безпілотних систем 3-ї окремої штурмової бригади. Дякую Борису Тизенгаузену, дякую вам, глядачам його YouTube-каналу, за те, що зібрали нам на 5 отаких чудових дронів Матріс 30Т.
Які допомагають нам нищити ворога завдяки цим чудовим дронам.
Цих дронів вистачить нам надовго, вони є багаторазовими.
I keep saying it, together we are a great force. Meanwhile, Ukraine continues to heroically resist and put up a worthy fight against the occupiers. As usual, we begin by focusing on the most effective and impactful sanctions. These are the coordinated strikes carried out by the armed forces of Ukraine, the Security Service of Ukraine, and the main intelligence directorate on important and high-value Russian targets. And for a long time, we've been waiting for the moment when not only drones would start flying in and sending their regards to Russian factories and oil refineries, and now that time has come. A strike was carried out on the Bryansk chemical plant with missiles, including Storm Shadow, which managed to get past Russian air defenses. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. By the way, it seems that Flamingo missiles also hit the site. So, the Bryansk chemical plant, named after the 50th anniversary of the USSR, as it's officially called, is a Rostec Contour enterprise specializing in gunpowder, explosives, and components for rocket fuel. In short, it's a highly explosive facility by nature, and some very explosive gifts landed there. The strike basically destroyed the plant. So the strike on the Bryansk chemical plant is strategic, because gunpowder, explosives, and rocket fuel are exactly the bottleneck for the production rates of artillery shells and rockets. In other words, hitting such key points is a blow to the entire ammunition supply chain. And that's not all. Today there was even a strike on Makhachkala, hitting Dagnefteprodukt, the Dagestan oil products facility. The precision was just surgical. Take a look at this video and observe carefully how they managed to take out one of the most important and essential purification units at this oil depot facility. Watch this very closely. Right here, in this exact spot, there you go, just like that. Did you see how it happened? And let me remind you, this is the coast of the Caspian Sea, more than 1,000 kilometers from the front line. It's also important to note that the main purpose of this plant is to supply and store fuel for the Caspian Fleet's naval base. And of course, to refuel the Russian occupiers' military vessels. They process about 1 million tons annually. But that's not all. Saransk, a strike on the Saransk mechanical plant, which is also part of Rostec and produces ammunition, components for mines, fuses, and detonators. It also manufactures engineering munitions, but I think right now it's mostly working for the military-industrial complex. And also so that Putin doesn't think that when he strikes Ukrainian energy infrastructure, nothing will come back at him. Part of Smolensk lost electricity today because something hit the Smolensk CHP plant. If Russians had simply lived peacefully, their lights wouldn't go out, they'd have reliable heat, their various important factories wouldn't be hit, and 1 million of their brothers, sons, and fathers wouldn't have died ingloriously in the Ukrainian steppes. But no, Putin had to start this war, and now this is a war. It's coming more and deeper into Russian territory. That's important too. And as a result, gasoline on the St. Petersburg exchange has increased in price 16-fold over the past year. So this isn't even the limit yet. And then Trump appeared, who apparently took a rather short pause and said that within 2 days they would inform whether a meeting with Putin could take place, whether it will happen or not. So, you see, to this day no one knows whether this meeting in Hungary will take place or not, or who is negotiating about what there. I just don't understand. And Trump also repeated his call to stop the war along the front line. I quote, I said, go to the line of battle. And then you pull back, go home, and everyone takes some time to rest. Because you have 2 countries that are killing each other. 2 countries are losing up to 7,000 soldiers a week. So let's see what happens. We haven't made a decision yet, said Donald Trump. I specifically included this phrase in today's episode because it's important to make one correction. It's not 2 countries killing each other, as Donald Trump says, but rather one country has attacked and is killing the people of another country in order to seize its territory. The other side is defending itself, that is, protecting its freedom, independence, homes, and children. It's important to repeat this so there is no temptation to blur who the real aggressor is. Have you noticed how this whole story has been blurred? Now it's just 2 countries that are supposedly at war with each other. Why are they fighting? Who attacked whom? No one knows. See how it turns out? This is not simply a boxing match, as some have said, where both sides explicitly agree to the fight. No, this is not a boxing match. Ukrainians never wanted to fight. I've said this 100 times. Russia, on the other hand, is constantly at war. And all of Russia's neighbors should not forget this either. Let me remind you what Russia is currently demanding, according to the media. They demand to be given the remaining part of Donbas, and in exchange, Putin offers not to occupy the territories of Zaporizhia and Kherson regions, which are currently under the control of the armed forces of Ukraine. In other words, Putin is proposing that we provide him with what he cannot successfully capture, in exchange for him providing us with what he also cannot successfully capture. Just to make it absolutely clear for our friends across the ocean, imagine Putin sitting in Moscow, writes Alaska into his constitution and says, now give me Alaska. I've added it to my constitution. It used to be Russian. And here's a document about Rurik. Here are the Pechenegs. Here are the Polovtsians. Give me Alaska. It used to be Russian. But I can't conquer Alaska. That's just how it is. But if you don't give me Alaska, then I'll conquer California. But that's not a given either, because I can't conquer California right now either. So just give Alaska back, just like that. Come on, give it back. And by the way, Trump told journalists, why did you think that a meeting with Putin in Budapest would be a waste of time? I never said that. He really didn't say that. What he said was, I want to know the situation before the meeting and whether I even need to fly there or not. As for I never said that, I'll keep quiet about the 24 hours. Although I didn't keep quiet, as you can see, sometimes that happens too. And now the Russians are trying to make it look like Ukraine wants to disrupt the negotiations. No, Ukraine and European leaders have made an absolutely clear statement. We support Trump's initiative, a halt to hostilities along the line of contact and a ceasefire after that. So now Putin has to somehow wriggle out of it and come up with a reason why he doesn't want to, can't, or shouldn't go to Hungary to meet with Trump. Because if he just sits down with Trump like that, Trump will say, okay, I have 2 points. A halt along the front line and a ceasefire. Yes or no? Is that possible? It's possible. And before that, before flying, Marco Rubio and Lavrov still have to discuss this agenda between themselves. So this time, spinning tales about the Pechenegs won't work. It feels like this time, Trump figured out pretty quickly that they were trying to fool him. Well, By the fifth time, you probably understand it better than the first, right? And now they're coming up with all sorts of excuses in Russia. For example, Lavrov says that first the root causes of this war need to be addressed. The most interesting thing, really the most interesting thing, is that nowhere, not on the president's website, nor in any official speech by Lavrov, Zakharova, or Medvedev, that, well, Ethel Berserker, nowhere will you find a list, point by point, of the root causes of the war in Ukraine. It's a tactic so that later they can add something in or take something out. There's simply no need to name them. And then there's the claim on Russian propaganda channels that someone wants to assassinate Putin in Hungary. This is just kindergarten stuff at this point. Half the world would gladly get their hands on Putin's throat, and as for Ukrainians, every single one of them would definitely want to do it. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Let's see how many of us there are who, upon seeing the news that Putin has gone to hell, would immediately pop open a bottle of champagne, even if we don't drink. So subscribe, and let's see how many of us there are. And don't forget to get your sane friends to subscribe too. And the situation regarding sanctions against those who buy Russian oil and gas has become a bit clearer. Trump will not impose tariffs on China over purchases of oil from Russia. He stated that he does not plan to introduce these additional tariffs against China in connection with their oil purchases. I want to be kind to China, Donald Trump told reporters in yesterday's broadcast. I talked about how China trapped the United States in a resource trap with rare earth metals and how in September China began tightening the screws on the supply of these important elements. I have a feeling that the real kindness toward China actually lies in this very trap that China unfortunately has set so skillfully. I've already said that autocracies have one undeniable advantage. They can plan decades ahead. It's different in democracies. One political force comes, another goes, and the direction changes. Now let's go for green energy. No, let's go back to coal and gas. Now it's green again, and so on. China, on the other hand, can plan in 30-year increments. But this once again shows, by the way, that properly implemented sanctions and monitoring their enforcement really can deprive Putin of the ability to continue this war. You just need the will and to make the right political decision. A just political decision. Although, as I say just and political now, I realize, where do these two concepts actually intersect? Well, in the oil rehab center where those addicted to Russian oil are undergoing rehabilitation, everything is stable. Hungary will challenge the EU Council's decision to refuse Russian gas in the European Court, said Hungary's Foreign Minister Szijjártó. Go ahead, argue, complain, sure. Complain to Sportlotto right away. Or better yet, complain to the UN. It's at moments like this that I'm glad the UN is just an organization of restless nations. It can't stop a war. It can't kick Putin and Russia out of its ranks. Go ahead, complain to the UN. That's a guarantee that everything is just fine. You can also write to the Justice League while you're at it. By the way, Orban doesn't want to challenge the EU Council's decision to refuse Russian gas, but rather his own country's membership in the European Union. I mean, complaining to the EU about an EU decision is just downright brazen, don't you think? And as for you, friends, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, subscribe to this channel, and let's support our legendary Azov. Let me remind you, the details are in the description of this video. We've already passed more than half of our fundraising goal. We're making good progress. Let's show our support. Wishing us all a peaceful day and glory to Ukraine.